Okay, so from the very beginning part of the semester, we've been dealing with this one concept, follow through and overlap. This is from the Illusion of Life little video, which is based on the Illusion of Life book by Frank and Ollie. I'll go ahead and just play this little clip.
When the main body of the character stops, all other parts continue to catch up to the main mass. Nothing stops all at once. Slow in and...
Right? Nothing stops all at once. This is a big thing. It's kind of the causation of animation, right? That there's the force applied on something, and then there's physical properties, right? Kind of drag, resistance, variety as far as the limbs, or in this case, this is the little torso for the boxy body. So we've really been stressing that in class, right? So, I find that usually at the very beginning, students do not have a hard time with understanding this basic concept, right? That as the character like zooms in across the screen, it kind of comes to a rest and has to do some little jiggle, right? Let's open up a different file here. Okay, so this is a character rig that we're going to create actually in class together. This little finger puppet. And so the whole idea is the finger puppet for this assignment has to hop up onto some stairs, and we're going to create the stairs using a little MASH network. So it'll be kind of clever procedural animation. We'll blend into our little keyframe animation. All right, so if I select this character, this is kind of constructed in such a way. You can see that they're moving together. Each one of these has its own. Oops, let's make sure that's at 0 there. So, but if we select all three at the same time, actually I'm going to do this in the X, right? You can see that I'm bending the character, right? But it doesn't have a bend deformer in there. I'm creating that illusion by rotating these. Oops, I'm just going to do it on that one. So, but the one thing about this, go back to this base again, is if I rotate these, you can see that it all comes over at the side, but as this starts to move back, say let's imagine this is going to go back the other direction like this, right? So, but when this happens, this piece would start moving back this direction, and these actually might still be bending, right, trying to play catch up, and then this would get here, and then this one starts to bend back that other way, but maybe this one hasn't done it that much, just a little bit. So there's always a lag behind with what these are doing. And I find that sometimes students have a hard time implementing the bend when they have to do it on their own, and especially when they have to think about the offset, right? So maybe if I were animating this character coming in and landing, and it hits on the ground, well, maybe this upper body stuff has to bounce down a little bit, and if whatever this one's doing, this one gets affected by it even more, right? It's kind of like your head or your hands, like as you try to land, your arms fling down and your head bounces a little bit, right? So all these motions are cascading through the body, this overlapping motion, right? So it's a little bit more challenging, I think, for students, but it's a very important thing. Obviously, you can't animate a character with limbs and not understand this concept, right? So that's what this next assignment is going to be about. All right, so that's what we're going after. The first thing, though, is we need a rig. And for this assignment, instead of just handing this off, we build this one in class. So that's what I'm going to cover in this tutorial. All right, so right off the bat, I've got my little poly modeling, and I'm going to create a sphere, and I'll create a cube. I'm going to leave the cube where it is for a second. And the sphere, as a default, if I look at its size, as a radius of 1 or a diameter of 2. So if I move it up 1, it'll be sitting right there on the ground plane. I'm going to go one of the side views. And I'm just going to scale this up. So it's just a little bit bigger. And I'll hit this. If I right click and I select vertex, right? So I can select the components. Everyone should be far enough into, oops, let's make this maybe one more. Yeah, maybe that one, that'll work. Okay. So what I'm trying to do here is just build one knuckle, and I want to make a particular point here is that when I'm animating my character, if it's from a distance and I have 3 little knuckles, right, these little segments of a finger for the finger puppet in here, sometimes it's difficult to maybe get down in there and select the little sphere. It will be even more difficult when we create a new knuckle here. So what I want to do is be able to select these longer segments, right? And the issue with that segment is that it needs to pivot in the right place, right? So if this is that center, or in this case, it's actually going to be on the ground. I'll talk about that in a second. We need to make sure that this is in the right place. Right? I think we can all agree that this is not going to work, right? Because it's going to go through that little ball. You could parent it up so that the ball does the rotation, right? But then it's difficult to select, and I'm almost creating a somewhat needless challenge so that you understand that there's times when you need to modify where the pivot is for an object so that it animates correctly. And also, in this case, so it's easier to select for animation. Right, so in the view here, I'm just going to go to, where are we going? I'm going to turn on wireframe, right? This one here, or you can say wireframe unshaded, right under the shading tab. I'm using this just so that I can, I'm going to try to standardize this a little bit. I'm just trying to pivot this, or put this base here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In that location, and then the other thing, in fact I might even move it up, maybe I'll go with that one. But I'm also going to do is move this pivot so that it's right at the center of the sphere itself. So it looks like it's pivoting around as if this little ball bearing knuckle was rotating. So I'm going to hold down the D key, and I'm just going to move this pivot, and I could snap it there, or I could do something extreme, but I'm just going to get this close enough, right? And that's why I turned on the wireframe, because looking at this sphere, if I line it up here, and I haven't moved anything off the X or Z axis, they should be lined up with each other. And the nice thing about that is when I rotate, okay, it will appear to pivot off of that knuckle. And this is what we're going to want for the other knuckles that are up above this. The last thing that's going to be down here actually is a controller that we're going to parent this to. This is important because let's say I have my character bent like this, but I want to animate it like moving up and down. I want to have a separate control, or if it's bent this way, I want to be able to have a control that sits on the ground, but it's oriented with the ground plane so I can move the character in that direction, right? So let's just go ahead and put that rotation back to 0, right? And I guess the other thing is kind of this modular construction. I'm going to build 3 of these, right, in such a way. So I want to make sure I get everything set up so I don't have to do this multiple times. So the other thing is I don't really like perfect edges, right? I'll talk more in class about the fakery of perfect edges in the computer. But in this instance, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bevel these, so I can just select select the edges. Right, so if I right click, select edge, and I select all of them, I can just hold down Shift and right click, and I can just do bevel edge. And I'll bring up this little controller here. Right, you can see I can make it bigger or smaller. I'm just going to make this, what was this, 0.1, and I'll make the segments 2. That looks pretty good to me. If you want to get it really smooth, right, I can do that. I hit 3 on the keyboard, right, I get a relatively rounded structure. And it's going to work for me. I could insert a bunch of edges into the loop. In fact, I could probably just get away with not even hitting, if I hit 3 on my keyboard, this smooths this off. I'm just going to leave it at 1. And I can modify the edges if I need to. Let's modify display. I could set the angle. Let's make this 60. Right, so you can see it's nice and rounded there. In class, I'll talk more about the details of the shading because that angle basically measures the normals on the surface itself. So I get a nice rounded edge without having to do a subdivision surface, right? Okay, so I've got this little goalpost almost, right? It has these little rounded edges to it. And I've got a sphere. What I need to do is parent these up in such a way that it's useful. And I'm actually going to take the sphere, I'm going to use the middle mouse button, and drag and drop it on the cube, right? But remember, my cube is in the right position for that pivot, right? So it's kind of rolling on the ground there. I am going to have that other controller in that place. But because I'm going to use a tiered duplication here, right? I can move that later, but for now I want to make sure that's at that center pivot the whole entire time. So let's do some naming actually. So let's call this knuckle 1. I'm going to leave the P-sphere right there. I'm going to select that and I'll just do Command D to create a new one. And you can see I have another little knuckle. Let's go to that side view. So again, the nice thing here is that I've already created the basic structure of this. I'm going to grab the scale and just scale that down just a little bit more. I'm even going to position this. Hopefully you can see that I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the center, 1, 2, 3, 4. Right? So if I select the knuckle itself, it's just going to rotate it, or the sphere, where that knuckle would be. I'm not getting the whole component, but from a distance, again, it's so much easier to select that, right? And we could create a rigging system, but we're not going to do that for this. Right? So this one is working, and I'll go ahead and do Command D, right, to duplicate. This is also, and I'm on a Mac, so I guess that would be Control probably on the PC. We could just do duplicate there, right? Oops. Guess we have to have something to duplicate. And I'll move that up. And we'll scale it down just a little bit. And there's no set recipe for this. The one thing I would say is you want to kind of make sure that you have enough room in between these so that when the knuckle bends, right, it won't fully run into the surface. So you have to give yourself enough room for that. So use your best judgment, experiment with that a little bit, but that one's pretty good, right? So I have all these pieces here, but they're individual. In fact, I'm just going to fold these up. So if I look here, I have knuckle 1, I have knuckle 2, I have knuckle 3. If I rotate knuckle 1, you can see that it's not working. And if I have knuckle 2, it's not doing its thing. All right, so at this point, I'm going to show something, and just so you can get a feel for this, I would advise that actually, let's do this one here. Let's say I wanted to make this taller, right? So you can see already this would be problematic because it would scale this. Maybe what I'll do is I'll unparent that one so I can scale this up. And then I'll put that back in there. Right, so if I parent these and don't do this, I'm just trying to make a point here. So if I rotate this piece and then I rotate this piece, actually it's hanging in there. So when I have offset scales inside of this, I can get some weird deformations on these pieces where I get weird distortions, I guess, based on all that scaling. So always, always, always zero out the scaling transformations of these objects. If I thought about this before I got into this tutorial, I would have set this up a little bit differently so you could see that. But I still have these 3 components. Oops, let's put that sphere back in there. All right, so I have all 3 of these, and I did scale them, right? I scaled them uniformly, which is not a bad deal. I guess that's why the deformation didn't happen. Let's do it like this. Shift P. I will demo this in such a way, right? And let's take a knuckle and let's put it up there. And let's put that back in there. And let's put that in there. All right. There we go. Can you see where this is happening? Can you see how that's shearing in that space? Problem is that the scaling, the transform, basically the math behind how this is scaled, it's not uniform. So it's been stretched in one direction, and that stretching gets extended onto this one. And since this one has an XYZ that's faced this way, when this child of it bends, well, I guess it bends, but it rotates, right? You can see you're going to get some shearing that can happen in there. So I'm going to go back, do a whole bunch of unparenting real quick. So it'll be incredibly problematic if you do that. And God is my witness, even though I try to show a demo every single time of how this will be disastrous for your rig, if you don't zero out transformations, students still end up doing it. So heed my words, please, and do this next step. So you can see I moved the translate for this, and I also have the scaling here. This one has the translate there. This one has its own scaling. I was very careful actually of making sure, I selected those vertices originally as far as the length. And that's why I didn't have any weird scaling attributes going on there. Anyways, so when I select each one of these, what I want to do is modify and freeze transformation. I'm going to choose the option, just make sure translate, rotate, and scale are all on. I'll hit apply. And then I can click on this one, I can hit apply again. I can also just click on it and hit G. And that's going to do that for everything that's underneath it as well, right? So everything has a nice little 0 point. This is helpful, right? If we get some weirdness and I want to animate, say, this knuckle moving away from this second knuckle here, then at least I know how to get it back to its default home, right? Which is 0. Okay, so now I have three separate pieces. I can rotate them all individually, right? But it's not exactly what we want. We just want to parent them up. So quickest way to do this is, well, several different ways to do this, I guess. You could do a drag and drop method. You can select this one. You select the third one and select the second, and then you hit P. And what that will do is put the knuckle 3 into that one. If I select knuckle 2 and then I hold down shift and I select knuckle 1 and I hit P, it will parent them all together, right? So as I unfold, I can see knuckle with its little child sphere, and another child has knuckle 2, which also has P sphere 1, and then knuckle 3. So these spheres we're not going to animate, we're just going to leave them. We will put we'll put materials on there. Now if you did it correctly, you should be able to select the knuckle 1, hold down shift, knuckle 2, still holding shift, it's knuckle 3. And if I rotate, right, you can see I have this little complex mechanism. Each one of them is rotating their own little X. So then the last thing I guess that I want to do is I'm going to put a little controller down here at the bottom. So I'll just create a NURB circle. I'm going to scale it up. I'm going to do modify freeze transformations. I'll give it a cool name like finger puppet control. Right. And I'm going to just hold down knuckle. I'm going to middle mouse, drag and drop, put it in there. So now I have this whole thing for moving it wherever I need to. I have this one for rotating, right? It's not technically correct. I mean, you would probably want it to rotate there from the very bottom. If I wanted to, I could just put that one there. Right, so when I select that, it pivots from that little point, but you got to be careful, right? Because then it runs into the floor. So that's honestly why I keep it right there, so it looks like it's kind of sliding a little bit. Okay. And then the nice thing is that if I have this all curled down like it's going to make a jump and it's going to fling, then I have this one here that I can move. I can also rotate, right, like it's looking around or something. All right, so let's put these back. Where are we at? 20 minutes. It's a long one, right? Okay. The last little bit, I think it's up to you what you want to do as far as cleaning and setting this up. I don't want to scale my finger puppet. Well, maybe I'll just leave it there, I guess. The one thing I didn't want to do with these is move them away from each other. So maybe you just want rotate available. So you could click on the translate and do lock and hide selected. Maybe I don't want to scale or do visibility, so I'll do lock and hide selected. I'll do the same for these, right? So I'm just highlighting. And if the hotkey G repeats a command in Maya, so since I just said basically lock and hide the selected attributes, I can do the same here, right? I'll just hit G, I'll hit G. So now this one is just going to rotate, this one's going to rotate, this one's going to rotate, and this one can do all the stuff it wants to, right? If I want to scale everything uniformly down, right? Make a smaller finger puppet. Or have multiple finger puppets, right? With different sizes. The last thing, I guess, that's sometimes helpful here, if I went to rigging, is I could create a character set. So I'm going to select this one here. In fact, actually I won't select anything. Control, I'm going to create a character set, and I'll call it finger puppet. And I'll just create this. And I don't have anything selected, so nothing has been added to that set, right? So it's down here. Oh, I guess in this one, what I should do is also delete history, right? So I get rid of the NURB curves information. All right, so I have the finger puppet character selected down here, right? Because I created it, already loaded it. I'm going to select all the attributes of the visibility. I'll go back up to control and I will say add to character set. I'll select this one, right? And I'll add these to character set, and I can do the same here, right? And then this time I'll just hit G. I'll select these, they're still highlighted, I'll hit G. So the nice thing about this is when I get to animating down here, all those attributes are now loaded. So if I need to shift any of the animation, they're all going to be down here, right? So I can do a lot of the heavy lifting in that space. All right, there's the finger puppet. In class, we'll probably talk about adding some materials to these individually. But for now, you should have a finger puppet ready to animate.